Is it possible for a person to have a connection with the higher self? But he is not aware of it.
Let's start by telling you what the higher self is for those guys who don't know at all, because there's too much of it in esoterics. On this topic, and it really makes me happy, especially, when people argue with me in the comments on YouTube saying that I'm explaining everything wrong, right? Again, I'm explaining the simplest things, the simplest. They are the simplest, so we have an immortal soul. Well, some call it the spirit. It's not that important. So the immortal part of us, it goes, so to speak, to another world. And then, especially those who believe in the theory of reincarnation, it comes from that other world right here. And that is us. So after death, just take any, Hollywood movies. So a person has died, right? He hovers above himself, sees his own body, and then goes somewhere to other worlds. Can we really say that this is something separate from us? It is not separate, it is who we are, it is our true deep essence, which we actually are. This connection actually exists for everyone. If there were no connection to the spirit, a person wouldn't walk, wouldn't move at all. They would be more like a zombie, or as they say, a bio-robot. So this connection, at least this fundamental root connection, exists for everyone. Another question is that there isn't a deeply realized connection. I'll explain why. The thing is, today we live in a pretty dense world, on this dense planet Earth. Very often this dense world, at some stage of human personality development, usually somewhere around, by the age of 5 to 6, we conducted a certain study with my club, yes, with my alumni club, where around the age of 5 to 6 there is a so-called fading. This obvious connection to the spirit, you can really see it in the child. So, at 2, 3, 4 years old, his mind isn't very developed yet. The neural connections aren't very strong, but at the same time, there's a very strong charge of spirit. You can see it right in his eyes. It shines. Yes, it shines. It sparkles. This very spirit, this purity, and what I call this, the breath of the otherworldly. Because of this, by the way, many adults love children. Because when you look into their eyes, you see in their eyes God, in the literal sense of the word, the spirit you see, and around the age of 5 to 6, he starts to fade a little bit. But it can't completely disappear, because again, if it completely disappears, then that's it. It's like death already.
That is, can we say that here, until the material world has influenced a person, until it has taken hold of him with its own rules, a person still holds on to the state of spirit, so he sometimes even has some memory of his past incarnations, like how he chose his parents. There are children who talk about it, right? So that's it, because he still has that little thread connecting him.
Exactly for that reason, yes. Because he still feels that world. But around the age of 5, 6, or 7, many children are already beginning to fall under the influence. Social egregores. These parents. Education. This is what is commonly called socialization. When you are simply already, you are so carried away by this game that you begin to lose that original essence, and it becomes more about intellect. Well, that is in the literal sense of the word. In fact, on this topic, a bunch of guys have written some really cool books. My absolute favorite book on this topic, for those who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth.
I understand. And look, if you take a child, say at 5, 6 years old, when it all starts, this is the capture of the matrix. If you take him and start educating him so that this does not happen, that is, protect him from some kind of material things there, from some moments that can capture him, you could say that they kind of capture him. Can he be raised in a way that he doesn't lose that connection to his spirit?
Yes. But I'll say this. Look, if you forbid a child from doing something, the child, being a pure spirit, their mind isn't very developed yet. And because of that, he is very empathetic. He is sensitive, and they feel the atmosphere in the family very keenly, right? And when you forbid them from doing something, that energy of prohibition, the energy of you can't do this and you can't do that, it has a strong impact. It really affects the mind. You can easily slide, into a sect of fanatics. There have been quite a few similar stories in our world, right, that seem to They're saying smart, right things. Guys are saying the right things. But, unfortunately, there's nothing good that comes from this. It's a completely healthy story. Not exactly healthy, yes. And in the end, we get what seems like esoteric people, and even with some kind of contact with the spirit, but at the same time, they're kind of completely detached, as they say. Completely ungrounded and with a lot of psychological trauma that will later have to be dealt with through psychotherapy, psychology, and so on. Well, I would say it like this. You can show him something. Again, remembering that he is empathetic, we can show him with our inner energy. Blissful, good. That's why I always say when someone comes to me, for example, and asks how to maintain a connection with the child's spirit. Yes, it's extremely simple. Just show him contact with the spirit through your own example. That's it. Don't restrict, don't forbid. Exactly.
The impact of the world?
Yes. Just show him through your own example how to stay in contact with the spirit. And I will say that the children of parents who they return to themselves, to their higher self, to their truest self, and they are very benevolent. They are really very benevolent. So they really, they just grasp things on an empathetic level. This initial charge, and you don't teach him anything, yet he still starts over time. Yes. Over time, to manifest very strongly. Spirit.
Well, I understood that your family was, let's say, benevolent. And so that's exactly why you have maintained this connection with your higher self.
I was born into a family of esotericists. It all really took off in the 90s, right? And in the early 90s, when I came into this world, my parents were reading The Ringing Cedars of Russia. They were reading Castaneda, Coelho, Richard Bach, stuff like that. So, it wasn't exactly esoteric, but rather, let's take, for example, the same Richard Bach, right? That's not exactly esoteric. It's kind of esoteric, but that's how it is. It's artistic. It is artistic and more like some kind of romanticization of esotericism rather than direct knowledge. And in that sense, they naturally passed this on to me, but after all, you see, again, over time, I've recalled many of my past lives and so on. I am an absolute apologist for the theory of past lives, absolutely the most absolute. I can say very clearly that these are definitely my past lives. I am 1,000% sure of this because these are such vivid memories that you can't just make them up, and they completely belong to me. Any person, really, who has truly deeply remembered their past lives, they no longer doubts that this is their past life. So I just remember a lot of my past lives. I remember many of my past lives exactly in this one, in a teacher's office. If I can put it that way, in a kind of teaching role. So it includes lives in India and lives in Japan. There were quite a lot of them. And in this life, I really loved Japan. Well, at one point, I spoke Japanese quite well. Then life in the Arab world, in America, in South America. I kind of traveled through many places that were connected to some kind of knowledge. And at the same time, I wasn't just gathering them there, but I was also teaching. And as far back as I can remember, I've been doing this since childhood. Exclusively teaching activities. Well, not since childhood, maybe since I was about 15 or 16, right? And in past lives, it was the same story. That's why I think there's a complex here. Here, the family was quite esoteric. And still, as a spirit, I have already practiced. It's specifically in teaching purely spiritual knowledge. That's it. This helped me a lot, including, yes, how, as you rightly pointed out, it's important not to lose contact with the spirit.
I think you had some big privileges, Danila, when you chose this life. Because something really cool matched up for you. Okay, thank you. Look, is this right? I understand that there's a big difference between just having contact with the higher self and being able to work with the higher self. In the first case, you just see it, feel it, and realize it, meaning you see that connection. And in the second case, you need some tools, maybe some techniques, practices, and so on.
Look, regarding contact with the higher self, yes. But you see, as I tell in school, again, For those who might not be aware, I haven't gone through any initiations. I've never been in any schools. I don't have teachers who taught me about the higher self. I don't have any. So my teacher is the higher self, me, and my own immortal part. I just, at one point, encountered a number of my friends and acquaintances who were telling me about the higher self. I just realized that what they talk about, what is discussed in modern esoteric schools, has always been with me. And after that, about 15 or 16 years ago, I started to shape it into something like my own school. Yes, it's been many years like that. So the way I talk about this topic is actually very close. As my own students later told me, it's very close to ancient schools. Students, it's very close. Exactly to the ancient schools. Not to modern esotericism, not to cosmoenergetics, not to channeling or any trendy directions, no. This is actually what I'm talking about. There's a lot of this in Dzogchen, a lot in Zen Buddhism, a lot in Hinduism, in the classical sense, in classical mysticism, partly in Sufism, and so on. That's it. And all the ancient schools, they always spoke not about contact with something, but about the fact that over time in esotericism, it began to be called the path of enlightenment. Again, yes, what is the path of enlightenment? The path of enlightenment is essentially when you don't just make contact with the spirit, you become the spirit again. And that's a very, very, very big difference. One thing is that you can do channeling towards the higher self, like, hello, higher self. How are you doing? How do you feel? But it's extremely strange because, again, the higher self is us. That's us. This is our immortal, absolutely eternal, immortal part. And calling yourself has always seemed a bit schizophrenic because it's like your right hand is calling your left hand. So it's you. This is you, and you can actually come to yourself. And this is a very important part. You are indeed coming to your higher self. Exactly. If we follow the techniques that I'm talking about, yes, you essentially become enlightened to some extent. Although, in my opinion, enlightenment is a strong brand under which, in general, many, especially judging by the comments on YouTube, many don't really understand what it is. Here, you go. You come to yourself. You really, in the literal sense of the word, come, and as if you understand. When you come to yourself, you don't really need special tools as much anymore, like you just asked about tools. It's not so much about the tools. You become yourself, and all your tools are part of you. They're within you. All the tools, they're already in you. All the tools, they are already within you. These aren't just separate practices, connections with something. No, when you truly connect with your spirit, you no longer need tools, because your spirit itself is one big, absolutely multifaceted tool. Here's what I want to say.
Look, am I understanding correctly what you see? The world from above. Is this all-encompassing vision helping you to get rid of some blocks? So this is what is healing?
Of course, yes.
So that's the tool.
Yes. The very perspective from the level of the higher self is already a tool. Absolutely right. I had a severe stutter. So I was born again in a body that had a huge amount of neuroses. A huge amount of neuroses, a very severe stutter. All the guys who know me, like from school, they know that the hardest thing for me was to tell something. So the fact that we are here together right now, I'm telling you something. I'm telling you. And this is not from the series there. Hello, 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 hello. But this is something much more meaningful. This is a big job for the higher self. It's a combination, actually. At times, I worked through some things with the help of my higher self. There were some things that I clearly saw in my higher self that needed to be worked through with the help of a psychotherapist. I went to a psychotherapist and worked through things with their help. But I worked through a lot with the help of my higher self. For example, my favorite story. At one point, I realized that I had quite the burden of the past accumulated from school, from my teenage years, because basically I was very quiet, calm, and a bit odd. Yeah. And because of that, many people didn't like me. And I accumulated a kind of burden of not very positive memories and interactions with the surrounding world. And I really worked through it. I approached it from the higher self. I rethought absolutely every moment of my past life. I rethought it. I saw all the causes and effects. So yeah, the higher self is essentially also, in a way, I became my own psychotherapist. Rethinking. So having rethought all of this, as of today, I have basically become a person without bad memories. In the literal sense of the word, I don't remember a single bad memory. Right now, I'm really sitting here trying to remember at least one bad memory. That's exactly the bad one. I don't remember.
So your memory gets erased?
No, they stopped being bad. They stopped being bad. From the perspective of the higher self, you know how you see the world very positively, very harmoniously. You see all the causes and effects. You see why you met that person and why they behaved the way they did. So yeah, it's like this. You become not just a player, you're no longer just a mindless player, right? You take control, you manage this game, you see from the level of the architect this game. And that's really valuable. We have a ton of texts coming out in our blog, just a bunch of texts from my club. Next year, there will already be 1,000 people in the club. Out of them, about 600, 700 are experienced practitioners in contact with the spirit. 700 people is actually a huge force. And this power, it sees. We look through a bunch of forces, we review the past, we look into the future, we explore different branches of reality. We're just rethinking the world and writing text. If someone just enters the blog and reads these texts, they'll see it. You'll see exactly this. Flirt, the flirt of the spirit.
Danila has one of the most popular blogs on Yandex Zen. There's a column about the higher self. There are probably 160 articles there, right?
120, I think.
120. Well, I just don't remember. I remember that there's a lot. I will say for myself that it's really cool to find such concentrated information about the higher self all in one place. I mean, it's also accessible, deeply conveyed, and it's just really great. I recommend it. Thank you. What I understood from your story is that what's really cool about what the higher self can offer in this regard, in this aspect is, it's about being able to see your blocks and to see some problems, because it often happens that a person comes to a psychologist and they leave. It takes a lot of time to uncover some problems, to get to the root causes, to understand why this happened. And then they work through it, and that takes even more time. That is, with the help of the higher self, you can do this much faster.
I would add just a little bit here. In fact, this is just one of the small directions. Because with the help of the higher self, again, yes, it's your spirit, you can do anything you want. You can do it, yes, you can do it, yes, in this regard, 1000% yes. But besides that, there's also an endless field of possibilities for activity.
Yes, I said that specifically in this aspect, like searching and working with beliefs. The coolest thing is that you can quickly find and uncover them, and then you can apply other tools like psychology to fix everything. Okay, thank you. I have another question. Does the soul have a personality, an ego? Because naturally, coming to Earth is conditioned by certain desires, goals, and tasks. But are desires only present in the personality? Or how?
Look, let's clarify this right away for the guys, especially those who love to write, that you are confusing the soul and the spirit. The soul and the spirit are, again, if you dig deeper, they are different. These are different layers. It's like, these are different designations of different bodies, but I really like the perspective that you just brought up. The perspective that you just initiated, let's do it. The soul and the higher self in this, we'll make them synonymous, if you don't mind. Because this is the most, of course, agreed. This is the most common, in fact, the topic that esotericists argue about what the soul is, what the spirit is, what the higher self is, and what the difference is. So we can definitely chat more about this topic separately, although, to be honest, I've written an entire text on it. And I also filmed a whole video on just this topic. Well, but since we are filming for an audience of such a wide spectrum, the most common term is exactly the one you used. And of the soul I'll put it this way. Look, the soul has an ego, but this is a very interesting topic because, again, as soon as we hit the terms, we have to unpack them. If we're talking about the human ego, I always say, what is the ego? The ego is a kind of hypertrophied emphasis on yourself that stands out from the general flow of life. So there is the flow of life, and you hypertrophically emphasize yourself. That's not a very positive ego. Here, people immediately start arguing with me and say that, well, this is called the false ego, and there is the true ego. I ask them, okay, what is the true ego? The true ego, they tell me, is just a kind of your own self. And the false ego is precisely a certain state in which the true ego becomes too hypertrophied. So much so that it starts to interfere with living. And that's the false ego. Here's an example.
Well, I was just talking about the true one.
Yes, you were just talking about the true ego. Yes, and the true ego is a kind of striving to gain new experiences, a kind of striving for self-expression, for individuality. Exactly, if we understand this, ego, yes, then it exists. It exists in the spirit, in the soul. It exists because there is a striving for individuality, a striving for the knowledge of experience, a striving for gaining new knowledge. Otherwise, we wouldn't have come here. Every spirit or soul, yes, whichever you prefer, that comes here to this world. It comes for a reason. It comes to gain certain experiences, to achieve some goals and tasks. If there are no goals and tasks, then we don't come here. If a person feels like they came into this world and that they don't really belong here, it's actually almost always, 99% of the time, a product of the mind. This means that he simply didn't understand, didn't remember, and didn't connect with his spirit. So deeply that you can remember. These are the goals and tasks.
Dear friends, I invite you all to my course with a personal vision, Return to the True Self. This course has been around for over 12 years. And recently we launched it in English with my complete personal vision in 6 modules, working with blocks, working with egregores, working with the ego, contacting the higher self. Answers to simple questions, answers to more complex questions, and then there's what we call the Great Journey. It's contact with space, contact with the planet, contact with God, contact with anything at your request through the higher self. Health, finances, relationships, purpose, past life. The course is available at any time. You can sign up for it using the link below this video. Come on over, I'll be waiting for you.